Go. Hello, World Stuttering Network. Today we have a very exciting guest, Professor Joshua St. Pierre. Joshua is a professor at the University of Alberta. He stutters. Professor Josh, what are you a professor of, first of all?
Oh, well, first of all, it's okay if you just call me Josh. You don't need to call
Okay,
me
Josh. All right. You got
Professor Josh.
it.
Thank you though. So I am a professor of political science at the University of Alberta. And I'm also Canada Research Chair in critical disability studies. So I was actually trained, my PhD is in philosophy, and then I kind of migrated over to political science, and I teach political theory there. Well, actually, I just teach now critical disability studies every year. It's like the dream job. I research for 8 months of the year, and then for 4 months of in the performance of 4 months of the year, every January to April, I teach, and it's really great. So yeah.
Um, for the lay people like myself, so how does critical disability studies tie into stuttering?
Uh, yeah. Do you mind if I tell uh, uh if I tell them more personal? If I approach that question in from a
Sure,
more personal way, yeah.
sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So uh it would have surprised earlier versions of myself to find myself here. um
Okay.
Mostly, I mean, yeah, I grew up in Alberta, which is where I am still currently, in rural Alberta. And um I and my family inherited what is a pretty, especially back then, but I'm now in lots of places, a pretty dominant view of stuttering, that like, well, like, what is stuttering, where stuttering um is something that is a detraction from what it means to live a full human life. And so in order to be happy, in order to live a full human life, I saw stuttering, and it was as something that was a my my business to take care of, but also B, I had to take care of it through some kind of therapeutic ways, if I wanted to find belonging within this world, right? So Fluency was my ticket, which it is for a lot of us, right? Our ticket to finding belonging in a world that's not designed for us. Anyway, so of course, I spent my entire like up until I was ooh the first 18, no, after that, up until I got to grad school here in like 2011. I had a very typical experience of um working through fluency shaping, and then getting frustrated with my inability to do this, and then leading to, like, and then trying to find forms of self talk that would work for me. So I'm just putting my notification, yeah, sorry, that would work for me. Anyways, it was always just like, the thing that like I couldn't ever transform was the shame
Oh, yeah,
around
yeah, of
stuttering, right?
course,
And
sure.
and this was the idea that at the core of it, we could dance around the issue, but that stuttering in its essence was something in an inherently negative thing, right? And
Yeah,
so all this self-talk was always kind of like I'm doing, trying to like put band-aids on this thing, right? Anyways, so I I struggled with shame above everything, I think. And when I came to the University of Alberta, I just happened to find myself in an apartment where they were doing a major, like 5-year research program that was studying the history of eugenics in my own backyard. So I don't know if you know about eugenics, but it is an idea that was very common in the late 19th and early 20th century, that we could actually breed a better version of humanity by increasing the number of desirables and by decreasing the amount of quote unquote undesirables, and that's the language I was used. So in my own province, I had no idea about this. I was born in, I mean, I was raised here. I've lived my entire life, and it was only like 15 years ago that I found out that Alberta has this history of sterilization of disabled people, and it had a sterilization policy from 1927 to 73, which is a long span, and many states in the U.S. had similar policies, and this is the thing I had no idea about, but it was like this weird secret that had been like in my own backyard this entire time. And so this idea, anyway, so it was this like this time when like my mind kind of expanded in like this way as like, holy cow, like how did I not know this? But also this was when I was introduced to critical disability studies, was in this context of meeting the survivors of these eugenic institutions who were still alive here in Alberta, you know, and it was a very visceral experience for me. Anyways, so it was in context there that I found that I encountered critical disability studies, which is the idea that disability is not an individual and biological phenomena. That disability is a complex relation that happens between um, uh, uh, between bodily variation and social structures and environments and worlds, and it's the interaction of these things where we create worlds, and we support the flourishing of actually only a very narrow set of human variation, right? There's actually a wide range of human variation, but we only build worlds and support them for quote unquote normal, for able-bodied folk, even though that is actually a really flexible. Anyway, so it was in this context that I thought about, okay, this makes so much sense that we can't understand what a disability is outside of its social structure, outside of its economic structure. You know, all these structures have to be included in the pod when we're understanding what disability is. And disability isn't just this biological thing that we add on to all these other things is actually the interaction of these things, right? So this was a really meaningful time for me as well. And so I was like, okay, where's stuttering within this literature, right? Because it's got to be here, right? Because it makes so much sense to me that stuttering, we can't understand stuttering just as an individual thing. Stuttering is actually a shared thing that happens between a speaker and a listener. It's a shared dynamic, and there's actually responsibility that the listener bears for communication as well, right? So and all this gets washed out when we're just talking about the individual communication skills and fluency versus not fluency, right? Instead of like talking about communication itself as always being a deeply as being a negotiation of shared things, right? So so this idea that when there's a quote unquote communication breakdown, it's not me who bears responsibility fully for it, right? That there's something that happened there that is way more complex about how we think about communication, how we think about time, right? How we think about time as being really inflexible, and communication is actually being really inflexible. So the question is, well, how do we actually build more hospitable communicative practices? How do we build a world that actually can stutter in itself, so stuttering isn't this, aberrant problem, right? Anyway, so also say that I was like just sparked at this time of the ways in which stuttering had up until a time been really cut off for interesting reasons from this longer history of disability studies and activism that from the 70s has really been an important force in disability circles, and stuttering has up until really quite recently been cut off, and so it's been really late to this party is what I'm trying to say. And so part of my work is like, how do we bring stuttering into the party of critical disability studies and activism?
Wow, there was a lot there. I was really fascinated by your explanation. Thank you very much. And something that really resonates with me is it took me a long time to realize the dynamic between myself and my listener. There is a responsibility there of the listener that if I actively listen to them, then I mean they really should actively listen to me, even though it might take me a little while longer because of stuttering. So there's a real uh, equality of responsibility. So yeah, I mean what you were saying really resonates with me. So um, I found you by your article, and it was a recent article, and the title was to reimagine stuttering. And I found it very intriguing that you talked about a new project called Stuttering Commons. And if you could share with the World Stuttering Network just what Stuttering Commons is, it sounds fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, so just before I do it, I just is the article is the one you found me through the BBC, or which article was it from? Sorry.
So the title was Reimagine Stuttering, and it was fairly recent. I don't know if it was from the BBC or where it was from. I can't really remember.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Someone sent it to me.
No, yeah, I got it. I actually hadn't seen this article yet.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Oh, okay, cool. It's up.
Someone
Nice.
sent it to me, Josh, and
Oh, cool.
and they said the World Stutter Network needs to meet this guy. He's a fascinating dude.
Cool. Well, okay. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. So, I've been involved in stuttering activism since I was a grad student. So I was a co-founder of the Did I Stutter project, which went from like, I don't know, yeah, it ended in like 2016 or 17, but it was kind of like this. So one of the things that I want to do, or I think that is important for me, is to open up space for the kinds of dreams we can have within the stuttering community, right?
Absolutely.
And so one of the ways, and so I think that it's important for me, at least, that there are radical voices within the stuttering community, even though I know that more radical positions aren't going to be everyone's cup of tea, right? There's still something about like holding space for what is possible. I think, that is expansive, and that it adds capacity to everyone in a way, right? And so there's like a fierceness of the critique that Did I Stutter has that is carried into the Stuttering Commons. So first off, Stuttering Commons is kind of our way of rectifying the fact that stuttering hasn't had access to this history of thinking and organizing, unlike a lot of other forms of disability. So within disability studies, I think that and within the realm of communication disabilities, stuttering and autism are kind of are at the front end of like leading the field, I think. So it's actually a really exciting time, I think, to for stuttering, as like people are being energized by realizing that our condition, of course, sorry, our condition, that like stuttering is of course unique in all kinds of important ways, that are important to hold on to, but it's also true in which the experiences that we have, we share a lot of similar experiences with other disability communities, like experiences of exclusion and experiences like how do we build community within a world that, like how do we build community that desires disfluency and that actually loves disfluency in a world where we know isn't going to be on board in that on that project, so there's a way in which like cultivating saying no to fluency is really important for Stuttering Commons, saying no, we're just not interested in what that offers, and partly because it's restrictive. It's a restrictive way of being human and relating with each other. And so it's also it's also an invitation to like, well, what would it mean to embrace disfluent ways of relating with each other and disfluent communication. So what Stuttering Commons is I'm the principal investigator on this 3-year project that we're hoping to get more funding for, to develop critical and accessible resources on disfluency, both for general public, but also developing resources for speech, developing critical resources for speech language pathologists, that will be used in their trainings to try and enact as much social change as far upstream as we can, you know. So yeah, so it's a disfluency affirming community and that is really interested in like building disfluency culture in this enclave of saying no thanks to fluency. Yeah.
So I have a question, Josh.
Yeah.
When you say building a culture that loves disfluency,
Mhm.
you mean that we love the life that stuttering has provided for us, the journey to where we are now and the life that we have as a person who stutters, or are you talking about the actual physical act of this fluency when we're in the moment of blocking or when we're in a moment of stuttering?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is something I think Chris Constantino's work on stuttering gain is helpful in this regard. I'm actually recording a podcast with Chris on stuttering gain on Thursday.
Cool.
I love Chris. But so I think both with an asterisk. So
okay.
So I don't think that anything is pure in and of itself, and it has to be for it to be true, right? So I love stuttering. I enjoy the jaw pain that I get. No, I don't have I don't have to say that's like an enjoyable part of my life. Like, do I always enjoy? I mean, I oftentimes enjoy the pleasure of of disrupting expectations, but I don't always love it. You know, there are some times where I do just want to order a hamburger and just without it being a statement, you know, without it being anything, you know. So but by and large, I think that the that there's something. I mean, I both loved disfluency as an aesthetic. Like, I think that there's something like really so it comes from a rejection of normativity that is really important for me. So I mean, I identify as a crip, which is a reclaiming of a derogatory term of cripple, right? So so to identify as crip is to reclaim this from a position of pride, I guess, right?
Okay.
And part of that is like is a rejection of normativity and all those desires. So I think I love being in crip community so much, where I find oftentimes, I mean, I've heard you know, yeah, that I find, so I think what I'm trying to say is I find fluency boring in the same way that I find able-bodiedness boring in the way that I can expect what's coming. You know, it's like it doesn't interest me. So anyways, but I know there's like that's a personal choice, you know, that like for each person to what it means to desire disfluency is going to be a deeply personal choice. But for me, it is both personal, but it's also structural in the sense that I really do desire a world that is less fluent. So
you're a fascinating guy. What do you mean when you say that you find joy in disrupting expectation?
Well, that's a good question. Okay, so I'm gonna again I'm just gonna borrow from Chris all afternoon apparently, but so I also
Go
love,
right ahead. He's a fellow Floridian.
yes, that's right.
He's my buddy.
About stuttering intimacy, right? And I love how he talks about how stuttering breaks up, like completely interrupts, or sorry, can interrupt the routine habits of a day, right? So much of how we interact with humans, like with each other, is by scripts. We have social and cultural scripts that, like, if this person does this, I do this, then we do this, and then it's good, and there's a lot of what we do is actually there is deeply habitualized how we encounter each other, right? We say, hey, how are you? I'm good, thanks. And oftentimes these habits are made so we can slide as effortlessly past each other as possible, on interaction. So there's a way in which, like, smoothness is always the name of the game. Not always, but like often, right? And being smooth is like culturally desirable. And it's not always so. And of course, smoothness, like everything, has like its positives as well. But when smoothness becomes the expectation and the standard by which life can unfold, right? There's a way. Sorry, I'm just now becoming a professor. What I'm trying to say is that I think that oftentimes stuttering and disfluency interrupts the routine ways in which we encounter each other, just like disability does all the time, right? There's a way in which it keeps you on your toes because you never know what's gonna happen. Like, there's a way in which a block that is really unsettling for a fluent speaker, because they don't know, like, are we going to be standing here for half a second, for 5 seconds, for a whole minute? What do I do if if it's after this time, right? And that's deeply uncomfortable, but at the same time there's something really, 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 really important that can open up and can be jostled a bit in these spaces that disfluency can create, right? There's something that actually happens, right? Things don't actually happen like in these routine exchanges. Hi, how are you? I'm good. Like, there's no happening. There's no happening at all. But stuttering can actually create space and time for something to happen in the world that wouldn't have otherwise happened, right? And that's a kind of like intimacy of the world that stuttering can invite, right? And that's why fluency, I just find, like, it just like spools out, in ways that don't interest me.
Gotcha. So I can definitely see how that happens on a social level for sure. It makes people stop and listen. It makes the stuttering. It causes people to pause. We're all so busy. We're 100 miles an hour, 24/7, and so yeah. Now, how do you think that works there in the business world?
Yes, ran down to brass tacks, huh? So this is part of a critique, is that there's, so I mean, partly it's not incompatible, you know, in itself, right? The business world doesn't have to be as inflexible and based on competition and outward presentation and performance as it is, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Yeah.
And so part of the critique of Fluency is a critique of the idea that time equals money, right? Like there is like a capitalist critique in here, in that saying that no, I'm not human capital, and I don't want to be shaped into a form that's going to, like, that's I'm not going to contort myself through all these kinds of disciplines into a fluent shape just in order to increase a bit of productivity and value, you know. So there is a thing of saying, why do I have to be the one who breaks? Why can't we adjust these systems? Because there's something deeply inequitable about fluency being a requirement to be to have value in the workforce, even, you know. So
I definitely agree with you that fluency should not have it should not be a factor in job performance for a person who stutters. I mean, it's and that's it's the ongoing battle that we have now and will have for quite a while. Yeah, definitely. So I read your article. I've been in stuttering support for almost 30 years now. And there's a term that you used in your article. Josh, I thought I'd heard everything, but I have never heard this term before. It was fluency privilege. I've never heard that before. I just wonder if you could explain that.
Man, I should have read this article
Sorry.
before coming on air. Just check this out. Well, I mean, I can imagine what I was saying. 1 second.
So sorry, I did not mean to put you on the spot.
No,
we could wait for another time. If you want to talk about some other time,
no,
that's fine.
I know I can. Don't worry, I got this. I just wanted to see the exact.
Okay.
I can't find it. But okay, well, fluency privilege. Fluency privilege is a way of talking about the systemic barriers that we face. So one of the things that I think is really helpful about disability studies is it consistently moves from thinking about disability as an individual thing to a social thing, right? And so under like a biomedical model of disability and stuttering, stuttering is an individual biological problem of some kind, or variation or whatever, but it's by definition individual, and it can't really be, it can have social effects and consequences, but those are always secondary from what stuttering is, right, in its most in its essence, right? And so social norms then are also these things that are they play out in the background of our analysis, right? And what a critical disability studies is, it flips those things so the individual is read through the social rather than the social being read through the individual. So from that perspective, the social norms of communication that construct the expectations of what it means to be a good or bad communicator, and I think even like constructs of our expectations of how to respond in these kinds of things, what habits we have, what practices we have. All these things are in some ways built around a norm that is biosocial, right? And the social part, it isn't just an extra part that gets tacked onto the bio thing. So fluency privilege is a way of fronting the way in which these norms of fluency are actually pretty central in as like a filter that filters through how we think about who has value, how we think about how we should allocate time in conversation. All these things aren't individual things, they're social and structural things. That is like, and what ties them together are these norms that are often unspoken, but they're not always unspoken, that accord privilege to fluent speakers, right? And this is a structural thing and not an individual thing. And to treat it as an individual thing is actually to misdiagnose what the problem is,
So society would have the fluency privilege. It wouldn't necessarily be the person who stutters.
No, yeah, it would. Fluent folk would experience fluent privilege in ways they don't recognize, right? So even like the expectation that you will be understood the first time is fluent privilege. And the idea that you wouldn't even have to think about that question, like, yeah, of course I can expect to be understood the first time. Like that, not thinking about it is also fluent privilege. So
Okay.
it's that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that would be fluent privilege in conversation, kind of in the social aspect, or
Yeah, there's also fluent privilege in how we assign value, to people. So even on like social media, right? You could say like who gets more likes, right? A stutter or someone who speaks fluently, right? And there's unconscious fluent privilege in why that's happening, right? And like people aren't like yeah, right. And so like it's all these little things that people who are fluent can just expect and rely on, that their social performance and or that one's intelligence isn't always going to be on the line, or sorry, um the idea that like asking for your name isn't going to be like an existential anxiety crisis thing where your very identity and performance of a rational human being is going to be up for grabs every single time. And the idea like where you can just like can take the stuff for granted, and don't have to spend all of your extra energy on that, and you can spend your energy on like other stuff instead, you know, like, and those are all forms of fluent privilege, I think.
You are definitely teaching me some new concepts. I just have a little experience in social media. I do a little bit of Facebook, and then it's all relating to stuttering support. So there's fluency privilege in social media between a fluent person and a person who stutters. The fluent person tends to get more likes than a person who stutters. Is that, or did
Mhm.
I misunderstand you?
Yeah. No, it's the fact that they get more likes, and also the fact that like one's social performance isn't that one's isn't always at stake.
No,
You
okay,
know,
okay.
you know.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Wow. I mean, like I told you before, Josh, I thought I'd heard every concept, and this is, I mean, you're in the new territory here. I think you are a fascinating guy. Fascinating. So, um, so you are a full professor now, okay? When I started Stuttering Support, it was very tough in 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 the world of academia for a person who stutters really to advance, to become a speech language pathologist, to become a a professor. Okay,
Mhm.
we're talking 30 years ago. So what changed that? Because now I see people who stutter as speech language pathologists everywhere. I mean,
Mhm.
it is um, what a tremendous improvement.
Yeah.
So I've always been curious as to how that happened. I mean, you have a front row seat.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. My opinion is that the cultural groundswell is stronger than just stuttering for this social change. Um, and this is and I think it actually is about disability studies and disability activism that has produced that for like the larger changes around how we think about disability, um socially and culturally, like that has been like the what's been, I think, like a big part of this push, like where we see change now at the surface about these things. um and so for me it's really important that like we don't try and reinvent the wheel, precisely because I like, as a stuttering community, and we actually learn from allies and other disability communities, because um because we're we're in the same struggle, A, and B, I think a lot of these changes, and B, because our community is now benefiting, I think, from these larger things that have happened in society. It just like when we're able to call out ableism as like a force that operates in the world akin to sexism, say, like the ability to put a term on that, really I think is like well, I don't know what the metaphor is, but it's like it's really led to a lot of change, I think. And so I'm being able to say, hey, ableism within SLP isn't okay, you know. And so the driving a motto of disability activism has always been nothing about us without us. And that is the same thing that I see happening within stuttering, right? There's been SLPs who are say, well, if you know, like for that, yeah. So nothing about us without us is involving communities in every stage, you know, of governance and decision making about these things about us, right? So I feel like it's those kinds of values that have really pushed to the surface and like allowed this kind of change. I know within like the past, there's like within the stuttering. So I was at a Stuttering Pride symposium in London this fall, and it was like really quite remarkable to like give a keynote address to like this big room and like think that like even like a decade ago, like this would have been an unthinkable thing, you know.
Right.
Not only that, like it wouldn't like we couldn't have filled the room, but like that we couldn't like it wasn't even like a thought that we had to think about yet. So I think like the social movement of Stuttering Pride is really gaining strength now, and I feel like it's becoming, and this has been my hope ever since the start, that it's becoming an idea that SLP can't ignore. You know, like that they are forced to reckon with this, you know. So
People who stutter proud of themselves and proud of what they are accomplishing, even with stuttering. I mean that is a tremendous achievement by the world stuttering community, and I see more and more of that every day, and what an influence on the kids. You know, the kids who stutter are going to grow up in a world that is completely different than than times past. You know, I have so much hope for the kids. They're going to far surpass us. That's for sure. Josh, I have taken so much of your time. Um, my apologies.
I'm
One
happy.
last question for you, sir. What
Sure.
does the future hold for Professor Josh?
Well, Stuttering Commons is just really starting now, so there's a lot of work on that. We have a library that is being added to the Stuttering Commons website this summer of like past. So we want to make a library as much open access as possible of resources that have already been created on disfluency and stuttering and stuff, like from a critical perspective. So there's and then I mean there's all kinds of Stuttering Commons work that we are just getting started on now. So that occupies actually a lot of my time.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But I also I'm also starting a second a second second book project. So which is on like something completely different than stuff I've done. Also, I'm not completely, but it's on religious ableism. So
Interesting. Okay.
yeah, yeah. I'm in a former life. I was also trained as a theologian and then abandoned
Oh,
and stuff.
okay.
Anyways, so yeah.
Okay.
So
Fascinating.
yeah. So I have all kinds of stuff on to go. It's yeah, it keeps me busy. But I actually spend like lot of my time thinking about how to bridge critical theory and clinical practice. So I'm doing a lot of work around that because I think that's an important part of this project too. So
Well, Josh, thank you for your hard work and effort to make this world a better place for people who stutter. I am very grateful for your time today. I really enjoy meeting incredible people, and I find our conversation today very fascinating. So thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
thank you so much for having me, Tom. It's my honor.